38 years ago, I made a decision that changed my life forever, and it brings me to this moment right now. I decided to become a personal trainer. If you can imagine 38 years ago, the environment, the health and fitness industry and environment was much different, especially in the town that I lived in because it was so small. No one was doing personal training within 50 miles. I've explained this before in other podcasts as it relates to why 95% of trainers fail in an industry now that's much more conducive and personal trainer friendly, if you will. When I started, as I mentioned, no one knew what a personal trainer was. Hell, they thought I was an aerobics instructor, for goodness sake. And I really didn't have a template to know actually what to do as a personal trainer, other than knowing that I had acquired this personal information through bodybuilding, testing, training programs, nutrition, all the things that impacted changing the body in the most efficient way. That's what bodybuilding brought to this table for me. Because again, I had no one to talk to. You could look in muscle mags and things like that, but that was very confusing because it seemed like everybody had their own ideas about what was the best way to, for example, put on muscle or whatever. So it's really difficult to learn purely from the magazines or books. I mean, it helps. But as I said before, there's no better way to learn something than from firsthand experience. So I had to learn that from a whole different perspective. So the first thing I did before actually training clients, because that horrified me. My goal back then was to make sure, just like it is now, that every exercise that I did with a client was a great one. And that's really a hard goal to achieve or objective, but it's what I set for myself. Very high standard. I was pretty scripted as far as the kinds of exercises I was going to do for a client. At that point, I did not have my own studio. I was training in other studios. I had to use them as my place to try my methods out. Kind of like with these comedians when they're getting ready to do a special. They do all these other little venues to try their material out, to see how it works. So I was taking that very much the same approach, but I was scripted. Now, I wouldn't take my script, obviously, with me to the facility, but I had it memorized. I had it down in my head. And the idea behind that is you have this script that you can go to, but then you have to be able to make adjustments when you're actually in the game or when you're training that client. Because I was training in other facilities where there were a lot of other people there that were joining a gym membership. I had to give a personal training session and a workout to somebody in an environment that I didn't have a lot of control of. But that was actually a good thing in disguise as I look back on that. And this is what I learned about, how to create a personal training program for somebody, even if I was surrounded by people who were using the equipment that I needed to use. Because I wanted to make sure that I had a tempo with the client to keep them motivated instead of having to wait at each station. But here's what I learned that was very important. As it relates to a person when their goal is to focus on their fitness as opposed to an athlete, a bodybuilder, a football player. When you're training somebody for fitness, tighten, tone, and condition the body, order of exercise is not that important. In fact, it's not that important at all. Meaning, unlike an athlete where you're training the bigger body parts and then training the smaller ones, in a fitness program, you can train small. You can start with small body parts and move up to the bigger body parts, or the big to small. So the order of exercise doesn't make any difference. And what that did for me when I walked inside these big health clubs where there were a lot of people that I had to navigate around, it didn't upset my tempo because I train in micro circuits. I came up with that. I learned this micro circuit training when I was in Eastern Europe. It was very useful, especially when I came back home to do this training around all these people. So I had these micro circuits, which meant that I had 3 exercises in a circuit, for example, and that was my default. I had shorter circuits, I had a little bit longer circuits, but my default is 3 exercises in a circuit. It could be the same body part, it could be all different body parts, it doesn't matter, because again, I want to focus and emphasize that when you're training somebody for a fitness program, order of exercise doesn't matter. The body parts that you're training in that circuit doesn't matter. So that opens your universe up as a trainer. All of a sudden now you can navigate around all these people, keep your tempo up, and still give that client a great workout. That was something that became my foundation, and I focused right there. I ended up training a lot of athletes along the way, and to be very specific to their, not only their sport, but to the position of their sport. But because I was in a town that was so small, it made more sense for me to dive into the health and fitness market and then add athletes to my repertoire of things that I could do as far as training is concerned. So the reason why I'm bringing this up right now is 95% of trainers fail at trying to become a personal trainer. I believe it's because they don't know who they really are as a trainer. Besides the fact that so many of them don't really have enough information. It's a long learning curve. I'm not going to say that it's ever easy to learn something and to develop something to be a personal trainer. And then on top of that, being in a market that I was in that didn't even know what a personal trainer was. So it took a lot of thinking outside the box. And I've always said that, and it's part of my creed, my training creed, is that you have to be a student of the game. You have to keep learning about training applications, whether it be for weight training or cardio, and then nutrition, because those 3 components I've always said are the part of the foundation of what makes a good overall training program to make sure that you get that client results. It just doesn't happen. And there's a lot of failure involved. And you have to be willing, as a personal trainer, you have to be willing to overcome those obstacles. I think one of the best things that happened for me is that I didn't have something to fall back onto, because I left a family dairy business that was supposed to be left to me. So basically, I left and was operating out there as a personal trainer with no net underneath me in case I failed. There was failing, and failure was not an option. That's a huge motivator. So I would say that, if you're that personal trainer that's going to make the commitment to make this your full-time livelihood, jump in the water. Jump in the cold water with your whole body. Don't just stick your toes in there. Make that commitment, because that creates an urgency that makes you operate at a different level. Because in the back of your head, you know that there's nothing that's going to save you. The only thing that can save you is you. And I can tell you this, 38 years later, still in the industry, love it more now than I did before. If you take this approach, and if you have passion for what you're doing, you'll be surprised what you can do when your back is up against the wall.